The scorching sun beat down on the parched Arizona desert as Beatrice Sullivan's tears dried on her cheeks before they could even fall. Her swollen belly ached with each labored breath, her 7-month pregnancy making every movement a struggle as she dragged herself forward across the merciless landscape. The year was 1878, and Beatrice had been left to die by the man who had once promised her the world. "Keep going," she whispered to herself, one hand cradling her unborn child, the other pulling her battered body across the burning sand. Just keep going. 2 days earlier, she had been traveling west with her husband Thomas, a gambler with a silver tongue who had convinced her to leave her family in Boston for a better life in California. Their wagon had broken an axle, and Thomas had ridden ahead on their only horse to find help, or so he'd claimed. When night fell and he hadn't returned, Beatrice began to worry. By morning, she knew the truth: he wasn't coming back. She'd waited another full day before accepting her fate, gathering what little water remained and setting out on foot. Now that water was gone, her lips cracked and bleeding, her skin blistering under the relentless sun. The distant mountains wavered in her vision, mirages dancing along the horizon, taunting her with false hope. Beatrice stumbled, falling to her knees. The baby kicked inside her, a desperate plea for survival that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. "I'm trying." As darkness began to creep across the edges of her vision, Beatrice thought she heard the sound of hoofbeats. A hallucination, surely. Another cruel trick of her dying mind, but then came a voice, deep and concerned. "Madam, good Lord, madam, are you alive?" Through bleary eyes, she looked up to see a man dismounting from a magnificent chestnut stallion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy, like something from one of the dime novels she'd read back east. "Water," she managed to croak. "Please." The cowboy was at her side in an instant, gently lifting her head and bringing a canteen to her parched lips. "Easy now," he cautioned as she gulped desperately. "Not too fast or you'll be sick." The water was warm but felt like heaven sliding down her throat. When he pulled the canteen away, Beatrice whimpered. "More soon," he promised. "What's your name, madam?" "Beatrice Sullivan," she whispered. "Please, my baby." His eyes widened as they took in her swollen belly, and a flash of anger crossed his weathered features before being replaced by determination. "My name's Matthew Nolan. I'm going to get you someplace safe, Mrs. Sullivan, you and your little one both." With careful hands, Matthew lifted Beatrice onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. You just hold on, you hear me." As they rode, Beatrice drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the solid warmth of the cowboy at her back and the rhythmic motion of the horse beneath them. When she opened her eyes again, they were approaching a modest homestead, a simple cabin with a small barn and corral nestled at the base of a rocky outcropping. "We're here," Matthew said, his breath warm against her ear. "Stay with me, Mrs. Sullivan." He carried her inside, laying her gently on a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. The interior was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table, and a few handmade chairs. Not the home of a rich man, but one who took pride in what he had. For the next several hours, Matthew tended to Beatrice with careful attention. He helped her drink more water, mixed with a little sugar and salt from his meager supplies. He bathed her face and arms with cool cloths to bring down her fever and coaxed her to eat a few spoonfuls of stew. As night fell and Beatrice's mind cleared, she realized the danger she'd been in, how close she and her child had come to dying alone in the desert. "Why were you out there, Mrs. Sullivan?" Matthew asked as he changed the damp cloth on her forehead. "Where's your husband?" Beatrice turned her face away, shame burning in her chest. "Gone," she whispered. "Our wagon broke down and he rode ahead for help. He didn't come back." Matthew's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, simply nodded and continued his ministrations. When he finished, he pulled a chair beside the bed. "You need rest," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire tonight. If you need anything, just call out." "Thank you," Beatrice whispered. "Why are you helping me?" Matthew's expression softened. "My ma always said no decent man leaves another soul to suffer if he can help it. That's just the way of things." As Beatrice drifted into an exhausted sleep, She found herself wondering what kind of man this quiet cowboy really was, and whether she could truly trust anyone after what Thomas had done. Morning brought clarity along with the desert sunrise. Beatrice woke to find Matthew already up, cooking something that smelled delicious on the small iron stove. "Feeling better?" he asked when he noticed her watching him. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it was true. Her body still ached and her skin still burned from the sun, but the desperate thirst was gone and her head felt clear. "Thank you for saving us." Matthew nodded, bringing her a tin plate with eggs and a biscuit. "You're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel. Where were you headed?" "Redding, California," Beatrice said, taking a small bite of the biscuit. "Thomas, my husband, said there were opportunities there." "Redding's a fair distance," Matthew remarked, "and not an easy journey in your condition." Beatrice placed a protective hand over her belly. "I don't have much choice. I need to find work before the baby comes." Matthew frowned, stirring something in a pot. "No family to go back to. My parents disowned me when I married Thomas," she admitted. "They said he was beneath our station and would bring me nothing but heartache." A bitter smile touched her lips. "They were right, it seems." "I'm sorry," Matthew said simply. No platitudes, no judgment, just quiet sympathy that somehow meant more than flowery words of comfort. Over the next week, Beatrice regained her strength. Matthew proved to be a solitary man of few words but kind actions. He never pressed her for more information than she offered freely, and he treated her with a respect she hadn't experienced from a man in a long time. Each day, she learned a little more about him. Matthew had fought in the war, though he didn't specify which side. Afterward, he drifted west, working as a ranch hand until he'd saved enough to buy this small piece of land 3 years ago. He raised a few cattle, broke horses for neighboring ranchers, and lived a simple life far from others. "Don't you get lonely?" Beatrice asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. Matthew considered her question thoughtfully before answering. "Sometimes, but people tend to disappoint you. Animals are more honest." "Not all people disappoint," she said softly. His eyes met hers. "No, not all." That night, Beatrice felt the baby kick harder than ever before, as if celebrating their survival. She laughed aloud at the sensation, and when Matthew looked at her questioningly, she held out her hand. "Would you like to feel? The baby's quite active tonight." Hesitantly, Matthew placed his calloused hand on her belly. When the baby kicked against his palm, his eyes widened with wonder, and a smile transformed his serious face into something truly beautiful. "That's something," he whispered. "It is," Beatrice agreed, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how warm his hand felt through the thin fabric of her borrowed shirt, one of Matthew's, with the sleeves rolled up and tied at the waist to accommodate her growing belly. Matthew seemed to realize it too, quickly withdrawing his hand. "I should check on the horses," he said, rising abruptly and disappearing into the night. 2 weeks after Matthew had found her in the desert, Beatrice was helping him prepare dinner when she asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you really save me, Mr. Nolan?" Matthew paused in slicing a potato. "I told you, you told me what your mother taught you," she interrupted. "But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" For a long moment, Matthew was silent, his knife suspended over the cutting board. Then he set it down with a sigh. "My sister," he said quietly. "She was married to a man not unlike your Thomas, I suspect. When things got difficult, he left her and her unborn child by the time I found them." He shook his head. "I was too late. I promised myself if I ever had the chance to help someone else in her situation, I would." Beatrice placed her hand over his. "I'm so sorry about your sister, and I'm grateful you found me in time." Matthew turned his hand to grasp hers. "So am I, Mrs. Sullivan." "Beatrice," she corrected. "Please call me Beatrice." "Beatrice," he repeated, her name sounding like something precious in his deep voice. As July turned to August, Beatrice's due date drew nearer, and with it, the question of what would happen next. She couldn't impose on Matthew's hospitality forever, yet the prospect of continuing to California alone with a newborn terrified her. One evening, as she sat mending a shirt of Matthew's that had torn during his work with the cattle, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Winter will be here before long, and the pass to California gets treacherous. Perhaps you should consider staying until spring." Beatrice looked up from her sewing. "I couldn't impose on you for so long." "It's no imposition," he insisted. "The cabin's small, but I could build a partition for privacy, and an extra pair of hands around here would be welcome." The offer was practical, logical even, but Beatrice sensed something more behind it. In the weeks she'd spent in Matthew's company, she'd come to appreciate his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "I would need to earn my keep," she said carefully. "You already do more than your share," Matthew argued. "But if it makes you feel better, we can consider it an arrangement between friends." Friends, was that what they were? Beatrice wasn't sure what to call the connection that had formed between them, born of desperate circumstances but growing into something more complex with each passing day. Before she could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, dropping the shirt. "Beatrice." Matthew was at her side instantly. "What is it?" "The baby," she managed through clenched teeth. "I think it's coming." Matthew's face paled. "But it's too early, isn't it?" "A little," Beatrice admitted as another contraction gripped her, but not dangerously so. For all his capability in other matters, Matthew looked utterly lost at the prospect of childbirth. "I should fetch Mrs. Tanner from the neighboring ranch," he said, referring to the wife of a rancher who lived some miles away. "There's no time," Beatrice gasped as another pain ripped through her. "This baby isn't waiting." The next several hours were a blur of pain and fear. Matthew, to his credit, followed Beatrice's instructions as best he could, boiling water, gathering clean cloths, and supporting her through each contraction with steady hands and encouraging words. "You can do this," he told her as she struggled with a particularly difficult contraction. "You're the strongest person I know, Beatrice Sullivan." When the time came to push, Beatrice gripped Matthew's hands so tightly her nails left crescent marks in his skin, but he never complained, never wavered in his support. As dawn broke over the desert, a cry filled the small cabin, the healthy wail of a newborn taking her first breath. Matthew caught the tiny girl in his hands with a look of absolute wonder on his face. "She's here," he whispered, carefully cleaning the squalling infant before wrapping her in a clean blanket and placing her in Beatrice's trembling arms. "You have a daughter." Beatrice gazed down at the red, wrinkled face of her child, overcome with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "Welcome to the world." Looking up, she found Matthew watching them, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done this without you." "What will you name her?" he asked hoarsely. Beatrice thought for a moment. "Margaret," she decided. "After my grandmother, Margaret Hope Sullivan." "Hope," Matthew repeated. "It suits her." In the days that followed, Matthew proved himself as adept at helping with a newborn as he had been at ranch work. He fashioned a cradle from a wooden crate lined with the softest blankets he owned, boiled clean rags for diapers, and even took turns walking with little Hope when she fussed at night so Beatrice could rest. Watching him cradle her daughter with such tender care, Beatrice felt something shift in her heart. The gratitude she'd felt toward her rescuer had grown into admiration, then affection, and now something deeper she was afraid to name. One afternoon, as Hope slept peacefully in her makeshift cradle, Beatrice found Matthew on the porch, staring out at the vast desert landscape. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, joining him on the bench. Matthew smiled. "They might not be worth that much. I'll be the judge of that." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his words. "I was thinking about how strange life is. A month ago I was alone, set in my ways. Now my cabin's filled with baby cries and women's things, and somehow it feels more like a home than it ever has." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. "Matthew," Beatrice began hesitantly, "about your offer to stay until spring." "You don't have to decide now," he said quickly. "You've just had a baby. There's time." "The thing is," she continued, "I've been thinking about it a great deal, about what happens after spring, too." Matthew turned to face her fully, his expression guarded but hopeful. "And what have you been thinking?" Beatrice took a deep breath. "I've been thinking that Hope deserves a stable home with people who care for her, and I've been thinking that I haven't felt this safe, this valued in a very long time." "Beatrice," Matthew said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps there's a reason our paths crossed in that desert. Perhaps it wasn't just chance that brought us together." Matthew reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand in his. I believe that too. From the moment I found you, something changed for me. I just never thought that a woman with another man's child could care for you, Beatrice finished for him. That anyone could care for a broken old cowboy like me, he corrected gently. Especially someone as fine as you, Beatrice Sullivan. Beatrice laughed softly. I'm hardly fine, Matthew. I'm stubborn and too proud for my own good, and I've made terrible choices in the past. Haven't we all, he murmured, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But perhaps we can make better ones together. The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. Are you asking me to stay, not just until spring, but longer? I'm asking you to stay forever, Matthew said simply, to make a life here with me. I know it's not much, it's everything, Beatrice interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. A home, safety, a good man who treats me with respect. She squeezed his hand. But Matthew, you must understand what you're taking on. Hope isn't your child. Matthew's expression grew serious. She could be if you'll let me love her as my own. I already do, truth be told. As if on cue, a soft cry came from inside the cabin. Beatrice started to rise, but Matthew stood first. Let me, he said. Beatrice watched through the open door as Matthew lifted Hope from her cradle, cradling her tiny form against his broad chest with such natural tenderness that it made her heart ache. There now, little lady, he murmured, gently rocking the fussing infant. Your mama's just outside. Everything's all right. In that moment, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not in Boston with her disapproving parents, not in California chasing some elusive dream, but here in this humble cabin with this good, quiet man who had saved her life in more ways than one. When Matthew returned to the porch with Hope nestled contentedly in his arms, Beatrice made her decision. Yes, she said simply. Matthew looked at her, hope dawning in his eyes. Yes. Yes, we'll stay. Yes, we'll build a life here. Yes to everything you're offering, Matthew Nolan. The smile that broke across Matthew's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. I'll make you a proper home, Beatrice. You and Hope both, I promise you that. This is already more of a home than I've ever known, she assured him, but there's one condition. Matthew raised an eyebrow. Name it. I want to be your wife, not just someone who lives in your home. A real marriage, Matthew, in time when we're both ready. Matthew's eyes darkened with emotion. I've been ready since the moment you opened your eyes in this cabin and looked at me like I was worth something. You are worth everything, Beatrice whispered. With Hope cradled safely between them, Matthew leaned forward and pressed his lips to Beatrice's in a gentle, questioning kiss. When she responded, her free hand rising to cup his cheek, the kiss deepened, a promise of the love and life they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later by the traveling preacher who visited the scattered homesteads every few months. It was a simple ceremony, with only Mrs. Tanner and her husband as witnesses, but to Beatrice, it was perfect. She wore a dress Mrs. Tanner had helped her alter, with Hope nestled in a sling across her chest. And when Matthew looked at her as she walked toward him, the love in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. I, Matthew, take you, Beatrice, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his deep voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was her turn, Beatrice's voice trembled with emotion. I, Beatrice, take you, Matthew, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. As autumn gave way to winter, Matthew made good on his promise to build a better home. He added a proper bedroom to the cabin, with a window that caught the morning sun, and fashioned a real crib for Hope from wood he traded for with a carpenter in the nearest town. They settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared joy. Matthew taught Beatrice about ranch life, how to milk the cow he bought her as a wedding present, how to tend the vegetable garden they expanded together, how to recognize the signs of approaching weather in the desert sky. In turn, Beatrice brought warmth and purpose to his solitary existence, filling the cabin with cooking smells and laughter, with songs she sang to Hope, with the everyday magic of family life. Hope thrived under their joint care. growing from a tiny, fragile newborn into a sturdy, curious baby with her mother's dark curls and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. She reached for Matthew as readily as she did for Beatrice, and the first time she called him Da, the big cowboy had to turn away to hide the tears in his eyes. Their first Christmas together was modest but meaningful. Matthew carved a wooden horse for Hope, while Beatrice knitted him a warm scarf from wool she'd carefully saved from trading their eggs in town. They decorated a small juniper tree with paper stars and strings of dried berries, and as they sat before the fire that night, Hope asleep in her crib and snow falling gently outside, Beatrice felt a contentment she'd never thought possible. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, his arm around her shoulders. Beatrice leaned into his embrace. "I'm thinking about how close I came to dying in that desert and how instead I found life, real life with you." Matthew pressed a kiss to her temple. "We found each other, that's what matters." Spring brought new beginnings. The desert bloomed briefly with wildflowers, their cattle produced healthy calves, and Hope took her first tottering steps across the cabin floor, falling into Matthew's waiting arms with a giggle of triumph. It was also the spring that Beatrice discovered she was expecting again. When she told Matthew, his face lit with such joy that she knew any lingering doubts about her place in his heart were forever laid to rest. "Another child," he whispered, gathering her close. "Our child. Are you happy?" She asked, though she knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "You've given me everything, Beatrice, everything I never knew I needed." In the years that followed, the Nolan ranch prospered. Matthew's skill with horses brought buyers from as far as Colorado, and Beatrice's garden expanded to produce enough vegetables to sell at the market in town. Their family grew too. Hope was joined by a brother, Samuel, born strong and healthy in the winter of 1880, and later by twin girls, Clara and Catherine, who arrived on a stormy night in 1883 with the help of a proper doctor this time. The modest cabin expanded into a comfortable home with a wide porch where the children played and Beatrice and Matthew watched the desert sunsets. They added a proper barn, more grazing land, and eventually hired a young ranch hand to help with the increasing workload. Through it all, the droughts and the prosperous years, the childhood illnesses and the celebrations, the hard work and well-earned rest, the bond between Beatrice and Matthew only deepened. Their love, born in desperate circumstances and nurtured through shared challenges and joys, became the foundation upon which they built not just a family, but a legacy. Sometimes on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Beatrice would find Matthew looking out toward the desert where he had found her, his expression thoughtful. "Any regrets?" she would ask, slipping her hand into his. And always, Matthew would turn to her with that same look of wonder he'd worn when he first held Hope in his arms. "Not a single one," he would say, drawing her close. "You're the hope I never knew to pray for." Beatrice Nolan. On their 10th anniversary, as they stood together watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Matthew presented Beatrice with a small wooden box he had carved himself. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny painting of the desert on one side, and on the other the words "From despair to hope, from alone to beloved. M&B forever." "To remind you of our beginning," Matthew said, fastening the chain around her neck, "and to promise you our future." Beatrice touched the locket, then reached up to touch the face of the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I don't need reminders," she told him softly. "Every day with you is a gift I never take for granted." As the stars appeared one by one in the vast desert sky, Beatrice thought of how far she had come from that desperate day when she'd been abandoned and left to die. Through the harshest of circumstances, she had found not just survival, but love. Not just water for her parched throat, but a wellspring of hope that would never run dry. And as Matthew drew her into his arms for a kiss that still held all the tenderness of their first, Beatrice knew that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginning, led exactly where they were meant to go all along.